Sup, squad? Good to be back. Back from a vacation, feeling fresh, full of ideas, inspiration, topics that we got to get to. And the first one is we have a discussion topic. It's called Could You Win This Civil War? And we're going to try to one-shot this. I don't really feel like editing. I don't feel like doing do-overs. If there's mistakes, give me a little grace, okay? So this is what we're going to talk about today. Could you win the Civil War? This is a topic that was submitted by one of my friends. It's been talked about quite a bit in my circle. So we're going to get to the details. I've got a beverage. Hopefully you have one too. Let's discuss this. So today's discussion topic, as I just mentioned, is could you win the American Civil War of 1861 to 1865 with modern weapons and technology and 5 of your friends? So like I said, this was submitted by one of my friends. This topic has been debated intensely amongst my circle. I mean, we've gone over it again and again. We talked about it years ago, and then recently it resurfaced. Lots of arguments. People are not agreeing on how it would go, if it would be possible to win. Within my circle, there's a mixture of civilians and armed forces. I'm not a soldier. I'm not part of the armed forces, but some of my friends are, and they refer to me as a civilian, so I use that term. I think that's a great term, civilian. This is meant to promote consideration and discussion. I don't have the answer. I don't know what it is, okay? I want you to think about it. We're just going to put out some food for thought, some considerations. In fact, that's what each phase of this video is going to be called, just considerations. Again, like I said, I'm not military, nor am I a historian. So I have a basic civilian understanding of modern military capabilities, and then also a basic understanding of what was going on in 1861. I have online search engines. That's pretty much all I've got. So if people want to come after me about, well, we can do this with technology, we can do this in the Army, or like this was going on in 1865, I don't know. I'm just a guy, and I just am here to discuss it. So throw me a bone. Let's talk about it together. So let's get to the context. With every good argument, I think there needs to be some boundaries, right? Otherwise, we can get out there, right? You can just argue. I don't know. We got to set some ground rules here. And so here's what again, there's not a lot of agreement within my circles, but this is some of the basic boundaries that we've been able to agree upon in order to have a discussion. So it is you and 5 of your friends versus the entire Confederate Army. So that is a total of 6 people on your team. You plus your 5 besties versus an estimated 750,000 to a little over 1.2 million. This was estimated by the National Park Service.gov website. I Googled a few different places, and that was kind of the range. It was 750,000 to 1.2 million. We can just call it a million, right? Just cut it right in the middle. So another important detail is it must be some of your personal friends. You can't team up with somebody that you don't closely know. So you can't just think of, like, I don't know, a super team. This is not Fortnite, right? You're not calling in like made up people like Darth Vader. You're not calling in Jocko unless you happen to know him, which that would be sweet. But if you're like me, and you don't know these people, you got to stick with just your friends. You can pick from your good friends, who you want on your team, and you can pick wisely. You can pick some capable people versus some people that might be a liability. But it's got to be people that you know closely, right? It's got to be people in your circle. It's got to be a couple of your boys, for lack of a better term. Some really important details. You can only use ground weapons, nothing airborne. This is like airborne stuff, I think, just trivializes the whole thing, right? And that also just depends on, I don't know, your argument and your stance on all this. But we have decided only ground weapons, nothing airborne, no jets, no helicopters, no copters. I love saying copters. No airstrikes, no missiles, no drones, no satellites. I don't even know what satellites do aside from like satellite radar and satellite communications, but no satellites. I don't know. If there's satellite laser beams out there that I don't know about, can't use those. Nothing in space. Yes, RPGs, but no javelins, so no guided handheld missiles. Again, because that's kind of like crossing the line between ground warfare and air warfare. Yes, tanks, but you got to remember things like gas, operating crews, because people got to run it. I don't think tanks run on just one person. You got to reload that thing. Yes, modern guns and bombs. So that includes like machine guns, snipers, grenades, mines, artillery, things like that. Yes, modern ground technology. So camouflage, night vision goggles, radios, all that stuff. No UAV, because again, that's a flying object, right? And then no airborne radar, because again, nothing airborne. Now that we've set some ground rules, and again, this is not exhaustive, this is not complete, this is the few boundaries that my friends, my circle have agreed to when we talk about this. And so I'm just extending out that, that's the terms of our consideration. I'm extending that to you as well. Let's get to some key arguments. We're 5 minutes into this video. We haven't even talked about it yet. Hopefully your creative juices are stimulated, they're flowing. Consideration number one is technology. We're excluding weapons. So we're just talking about tech, right? Our technology has advanced so far since the 1860s. Like, I was just Googling some of the technology that they had. I was literally searching science in the 1860s, and Wikipedia is not exhaustive, but just Wikipedia alone for a reference was showing me some of the things that were invented during that time. And I mean, they didn't have a lot going on. So let's just think about tech, just the most basic stuff, right? Let's just start with the basics. We have flashlights. We've got spotlights. We've got night vision goggles. 1860s fellas, they were still using lanterns, right? They're holding up lanterns. They're like, who goes there? That was what they were using. The light bulb wasn't invented yet. I think that was like in the 1870s with Thomas Edison. We would have radios for communication. They didn't have radios. They had just invented the telegraph systems. So they had the wire systems, almost looked like electrical lines, but it was telegraphs. We have tanks, Humvees, motorcycles, just in general motorized vehicles. They had horses and trains, which is still kind of sick. You know what I mean? We got modern medicine. So that's assuming you have a doctor that's on your team. Again, it's got to be one of your friends. You can't just pick a doctor like, hey, I need a surgeon. If you know a surgeon, you can call him in. But keep in mind, are they going to be a warrior? Or are they going to be a surgeon? Assuming one of your friends, they would be healing somebody, they can't be fighting, so you got to protect them. Again, we're going to talk about that more in the future, but just, you got to make these considerations. You can't just stack your team. This is as unrealistic as this is. You got to be realistic. They don't have modern medicine in the 1860s. They didn't have surgery. They didn't have antibiotics. They were still, I can't remember the term because I'm making a video, chopping people's arms off. If somebody was injured, they were just, man, I can't think of that. Put it in the comments. Anyway, they were just slicing people's limbs off, and instead of doing surgery, instead of removing a bullet, if they couldn't just pull it out. Some other things to think about with technology. This is, something one of my friends brought up. They are much more accustomed to living off of the land. Most people nowadays are not going to be just cool with, living out in a field for weeks, months, years. I mean, this war went on for 5 or 6 years. Unless you got some bushcraft fellas in your squad, that's going to be an adjustment. I mean, I'm making a YouTube video right now. So, and I'm actually pretty outdoorsy, but I mean, am I going to live outside for 5 years while having guerrilla warfare? Because it's 6 people versus a million? That's going to be tough. You know what I mean? A lot of people are sleeping on that. Like, that's going to be tough. And these guys are just used to it. They're just like camping out in tents. That was what they did. So there's so much more on the technology front, but just to consider some of the biggest differences, I mean, that's some big stuff. I mean, vehicles, electricity, camouflage, communications. There's way more than that. You could, argue nutrition. You could argue just the amount of knowledge that we potentially have because of education of the average person nowadays versus what the average 25-year-old or whatever would have been then. I don't know. There's so much more, but just to set some basic stuff, the technology is overwhelmingly different between now and then. So let's move on to the next one. So consideration 2 is weapons. So we talked about technology, not including weapons. Now we are including weapons. I was reading up on the technology that they had in the 1860s. Well, specifically the weapons, the most common weapons they were used. And there was a lot. It was a huge list. I tried to just, list it out because, again, we're just considering it. We don't need to do an in-depth discussion of each and every weapon. But they have, in general, they were using bayonets. They were using knives, swords. That's kind of cool. They were on horses with swords, still doing that. They had revolvers. I didn't know that. They had muskets, so you're like reloading after every shot. They also had carbines, which were some rifles that you didn't have to reload after every single shot. Still not great, but that was pretty advanced at the time. They had cannon artillery. They had simple mines and grenades. I didn't know they had mines and grenades back then, but apparently they had some really simple stuff. But they were throwing bombs and then planting bombs also. Apparently they had armored trains and then like war balloons, like inflatable hot air balloons, and they would drop bombs from it. I don't know how much that was used. That was a thing they had. Kind of cool. I mean, just in general, we have so much stuff, but we have automatic rifles, machine guns, sniper rifles that, and they had sniper rifles too, but I mean, we're talking about like our sniper rifle can, I don't know, shoot 10 times farther if you are a sniper. I don't know what the average distance was. We would say at least 10 times farther. Just the sheer range of our warfare, and the fact that we can have way more bullets in a magazine. We had mortars, or we have mortars and artillery, and again, those things can fire like miles away, I think, versus what theirs were. Their cannons were not that far. We've got mines. You could set minefields. We've got grenades that you could throw. We've got tear gas. I'm sure there's all kinds of chemical warfare that we have that I don't even know about, but just assuming, regular combat stuff. Tear gas. We got Humvees. We have armored trucks with 50 caliber machine guns, which I guess is kind of like a Humvee. So much more, right? It's an overwhelming technology advantage now versus then. Some of my friends bring up some really good considerations. Like, yes, we've got so much more technology. The biggest problem would be stashing the amount of ammo that we need. We're talking about 1 million people if we just do the middle range, 750,000 to like 1.23 million people. 1 million people in the Confederate Army. That's at least 1 million bullets, probably way more than you need. Millions of bullets, bombs, fuel that you need for your vehicles. I'm sure we're going to be using vehicles, but like, just think about that. The biggest problem is, where are you going to put all of that ammo and all that fuel for your vehicles? Because you're going to be using it. You got to stash that somewhere. They don't have gas stations. You can't just pull up with the Humvee and refuel. So you got to have it somewhere, and you got to protect that cache, or that stash, whatever you want to say. And then you got to get that ammo and fuel back to your vehicle. Maybe you have it like a safe distance away, and you would drive back, refuel and reload, and then go back to the front lines. I don't know. That's just something to think about, right? The amount of ammo and fuel that you need, and then you have to be reloading and refueling. You have to have some amount of that with you. Some of that is stowed. I mean, that's going to be a huge stockpile of resources. I'm not saying it's, not going to be worth it, or that's going to be the deciding factor. But I mean, just think about that, right? That's a lot of resources that you're going to need. Okay, had to take a sip. So the other consideration will be the numbers. The sheer difference in numbers of warriors. We're talking about your squad of 6 people, you plus 5 friends, versus about 1 million. That is a huge difference. I mean, an enormous difference in personnel, in manpower, in just the amount of people shooting. Even if they're just shooting muskets at you, they're not going to have 1 million people all in one battlefield. It's probably all these different armies split up. But still, the amount of bullets, even if they have to reload and it takes them a full minute or 2 or 3, I don't know, just how long it takes to reload a musket or whatever. But they have to reload that. That's still like potentially thousands of bullets being shot at you at one time, right? And then of course you have your machine gun, so you just keep shooting bullets back at them. And I'm sure by the end of the day, you've probably shot more bullets, but still, would they be able to swarm and overwhelm you? I mean, can you hold off hundreds of thousands of people at one time with only 6 people operating 6 guns? I don't know. There's counter arguments to that. Maybe they never even get close. You've got artillery, can you operate artillery and tanks and whatever with only 6 people and keep it refueled and reloaded? Maybe you can keep them far away. Maybe you can just, as they're approaching, you can shoot them from miles away with artillery and mortars, and they never even get close. Or maybe you're in a tank and you drive up and you're shooting, and then you drive away and reload and refuel, and then you come back and you're shooting. I don't know, just something to think about. And then, like I said before, can you stash enough ammo and constantly be reloading without them breaking through your ranks? So that means you got some people that are shooting, some people that are reloading and refueling, and you got to have a little team cycle going. can you sustain an offensive front of like firepower that keeps them from advancing on your numbers and like getting behind you, flanking you, breaking your numbers? I know that we've got machine guns, and maybe one person can be like firing a machine gun while other people are reloading, but just think about that. That is so many people. Think about, this is really random, but if you've ever played like, I don't know, Call of Duty, and you're playing zombies and you get to the later rounds where there's just so many zombies, like you have to be moving constantly and have a place for them to move because there's so many following you. Even if you've got one guy with a machine gun shooting, like if you're standing in one place, they're going to swarm you eventually. The sheer amount they get around you, you can't shoot them fast enough. That's how this would be. I'm not saying they're just going to charge at you like zombies. I don't know. I'm just talking about the number, the differences in numbers. Also, like I mentioned before, if somebody's a doctor, can you protect them while they're healing and not fighting? That's just another thing. Also, can they be, healing somebody on the move? Like maybe in the back of a truck? I don't know. Just a thing to think about. Another thing is, when do you eat and sleep? So are you going to take shifts sleeping and protecting? That's probably what you'd have to do. Or is it like a 9-to-5 job? You, in the morning, the boys all get in a vehicle and you drive to the front lines and you fight until you run out of ammo and you're exhausted and you're hungry, and then you drive far enough away back to where your base is that they hopefully don't know about, and then rest and recover and then drive back to it the next day. It's just like your 9-to-5 job. Potentially. I mean, they've got horses and they've got trains. They could get to you, so you might have to keep moving your base, but you're going to go faster than a horse with your vehicles, with your trucks and stuff. And then the train can't go wherever it wants. It can only go where the track is. So with some strategy, you could probably avoid the trains. Then there's also another argument. It's the psychological consideration. I don't really like this argument because I don't know, this whole thing is ridiculous. So why would we try to, bring something psychological into it? But just for the sake of consideration, one of my friends consistently brings up the argument that could you actually shoot or blow up 1 million people without psychologically breaking, and then therefore you would lose, right? Because you're like, I can't do this, it's just, it would psychologically destroy you. And yes, that is a valid statement, but this whole thing is insane. We're talking about 6 people taking on the entire Confederate Army with, modern technology that's been developed over like 150 years versus whatever they're, what they had in the 1860s. This is an insane situation. So I feel like this psychological consideration is a little bit like, I don't know. I don't really like considering it. I think it's just not, I think we're beyond that. If we're having this discussion, we're just beyond this. But for those of you who want to have that psychological side, consider that. Could you, even if you had the tech and we could prove that you would win, would you be able to follow through? Interesting. Another thing I wanted to say that I forgot to mention on the weapons slide is that they had Gatling guns. I think I mentioned artillery and cannons and like muskets and stuff, but they had Gatling guns. That was invented in, I think it was 1860 or 1861. I looked that up. So they sort of had a machine gun. They had like the gun that had a whole bunch of barrels, and they would like crank the crankshaft, and I don't know, it would shoot a whole bunch of bullets. Pretty sick. I don't know that it's going to make that much of a difference, but pretty sweet. So the last consideration is water warfare. And this one is a little bit of a gray zone. This one is kind of thrown out by some of my friends because it's not technically ground warfare like we specified earlier, but it's also not airborne warfare technically. So I don't know. I thought I would mention this because some people, this is their strategy of the people I've talked to. They're like, look, this is how you win. And then other people are like, no, this is not within the bounds of, this argument that we've laid out. So some people throw this out. But for your consideration, water warfare in 1861 to 1865, they were still using ships with sails, right? That's a big difference. We have modern warships. Do you just post up out in the sea and let them come out to you? Or would it be a river? Because when I was reading on this, a lot of the major naval battles were actually river battles. Some of them were like in ports outside of New York and Charlotte and different places in South Carolina because they were trying to cut off trade routes. But a lot of these big battles were happening in rivers. So can your warship even fit in the river? I guess it depends. It would be like the Mississippi River. There's probably parts of the Mississippi River that your naval warship could fit in because of the width. There's other parts where it probably isn't deep enough. I don't know, you'd be pretty limited. That's an interesting thing to think about. You got to ponder it. Also, the much bigger ponderance is, could you operate a modern warship with 6 people? For sure not, right? I'm not in the Navy. I'm not a seaman. I'm not a seafarer, but no way you can operate the ship with 6 people, right? I mean, maybe you could drive it or captain it. I don't know. What do you don't pilot a ship, do you? Drive it? You drive the ship? Somebody tell me, what's the proper term for like operating a ship, for literally navigating it? You could probably drive it, maybe, with 6 people, depending on the size, but there's no way you can drive it and also operate the guns. It might take 6 people to operate one of the artillery units on the ship. That is crazy to me. By the way, when I was looking up naval stuff, there was technically, apparently, some very early submarines that were involved in naval battles in the Civil War. And naval historians correct us in the comments, but there were a few submarines. One of them actually sunk a ship, but then I guess the submarine, I didn't read very far into it, but everybody on the submarine died also. So like, I don't know, that's not a very good risk to reward ratio, I would say. But that's pretty sweet. And then there were some armored ships. They were almost like submarines because most of the ship was under the water level, and then they just had like the guns that were above, but they were like covered in iron. It was pretty sick. One of them was the USS Monitor, I think is what it's called, and the other one was something else. I don't remember. Pretty famous. They had a shootout. Pretty sick. Not gonna stand up against a modern warship for sure. No chance. So yeah, water warfare, something to consider. Let me know your thoughts on that one. So that pretty much wraps it up. I mean, there's so much more, right? This was not a comprehensive or an exhaustive list. This was meant for discussion. These were some of just the big things that we talked about, right? There's an argument for every side. You know, there's an argument on anything, and I would love to hear them. What are your thoughts? What are we missing? What's tech advantages or, I don't know, just perspectives and considerations that for either side that we missed. Yeah, what are we thinking here? Do you think you could do it with 5 of your homies? 6 people versus 1,000,000? I don't know. I think, me personally, the bandit take on this is I think that it is possible. And you know, we're already at 20 minutes, so I won't spend too much time talking about this, but I think it's possible that you could win with the right combination of people and if you pick the right equipment, because again, just you don't necessarily want to pick weapons and equipment that's going to take a lot of fuel and ammo, because you constantly will be reloading, and I think that's an opportunity for them. Like the amount of time it would take for you to win that war, they would eventually figure out like, oh, they have to reload, they have to refuel, even though they're just like in awe of the technology, they're just blown away. You know, it might crush their spirit, but like at some point they're going to figure out that you've got to reload, that you've got to, you know, that there's a time of weakness, because you're not just going to win in a day, I don't think, not without, you know, nukes and airborne stuff. So I think that you'd have to pick equipment and weapons that are very efficient, and then it's all going to come down to your strategy and tactics. You're probably going to have to like snipe their chain of command and just like dismantle their leadership and dismantle their communications until it's just chaos and they don't even know how to, you know, form an assault front against you. I think it's just going to be all come down to really efficient weapons that you don't have to reload a lot, that you don't have to constantly refuel. I don't think just driving a tank all day is going to win. It's going to win a lot of battles, but I don't know that it would win a war. I don't know that you'd be able to protect your stashes of ammo and fuel, because you'd probably constantly have to be moving it as this just front of people are advancing always. And then again, it's just going to be like modern strategy and communications. If you have the right strategy and the right communications and the right like assault tactics and overarching plan over weeks and months, then yeah, I think you could win. That's my take. I could be wrong. I'm not a commander. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Also, what should we discuss next? You know, love to take more topics. So let me know your considerations. And like I said, comment what we forgot. Thank you.